Remember how I said FNAF hit it big? Yeah, maybe a bit too big. Following the release of Sister Location, it felt like FNAF had irreversibly changed the landscape of indie horror to where soon everyone was trying to take a piece of that pie, and that started happening mostly in this period. Bendy and the Ink Machine, Baldi's Basics, Tattletale, Hello Neighbor, 123 Slaughter Me Street. I don't know, would that Game of the Park count for this? It created a subsection of horror called mascot horror, with one prevalent threat you have to deal with that served as the mascot for the game, with maybe some other minor threats, or at least that's what I understand as the community definition. I feel like we need a more narrowed down definition for the umbrella of games FNAF resulted in, because I feel like this definition could describe Nemesis from Resident Evil, and if I say that, people are gonna want to kill me. This could be a video in of itself, so I'll keep this brief. I am surprised that people are only now getting upset at the wave of clones that FNAF brought in the door, considering all the games I mentioned before were released in the period of only 2015 to 2017, with the exception of Baldi, who launched in early 2018. I feel like all the vitriol nowadays has to do with a combo of all the games I mentioned being more quality and not as explicitly marketed towards kids as the garbage coming out now is, and the people who were initially fans of the FNAF wave when they were younger are just growing out of the subgenre. That's all I'm gonna say on this topic though, because I've already gone back and forth on whether I want to make a video on this very subject or not, so we'll leave it there. For FNAF, though, I feel like the wave of games inspired by it sort of overshadowed FNAF to where, outside of its circle, it felt like there were a lot less people talking about it. In fact, even I was kinda like this at the time as well. Following Sister Location, I wasn't super into FNAF. I mean, I still paid attention enough to get back when 6 and Ultimate Custom Night came out, but I didn't really start getting super back into FNAF until Help Wanted came out. I didn't fall off the series due to getting burned by Sister Location, because that was more of a recent development. I was just playing other stuff, ironically Tattletale and especially Bendy, but that's a big story for a whole other video. And hey, speaking of Sister Location, between videos I found out the game has a higher Metacritic score than Kirby Air Ride and Sonic Riders, and oh man does that sting. Honestly, in this era, besides I think checking out the first 2 FNAF books, I mainly remember being in the community more than the stuff in the official series. Yeah, sure, let's talk about that, I've got time. The FNAF community is honestly pretty impressive when it comes to fan-created content. Yes, I have made a DeviantArt account, thanks for asking. I wear my badge with so much pride I deleted it. Some people just randomly make the most banger animations, put over random music for YouTube and for FNAF World of all games, and I'm still watching these, I can't lie. This is honestly kind of an excuse to mention fan songs and fan games, because I have a lot of fan game experience, and fan songs were actually the reason I got interest in FNAF. I know I mentioned my genius strategy of determining which game was the least scary in the first video, but the reason I even got interested in checking it out was because of JT Music's FNAF raps, and I still kinda like the ones for 2 and 3. I also remember listening to a lot of the songs DA Games made, which is how I found out about FNAF World, and I'm still listening to his stuff because his original tracks go unfathomably hard. I remember sometime around when FNAF 6 came out, I actually checked out a few FNAF fan games, notably the Candies games and Pop Goes. I've tossed around the idea of doing videos on a few of the big fan games, but with the new fanverse thing happening now, I'll probably just wait until the games for those come out, as it is with Pop Goes Arcade, Flumpties 3, and the teasers for FNAF Plus. I'm already really excited. Before we dive in though, it's recap time again, baby! I kinda like doing these so I don't have to worry too much about messing up and forgetting something, even though I do try to remember as much as I can. Anyway, going all the way back to FNAF 2, there's this hidden image in the game files just named Mike, and I'm pretty sure we still have no clue what it is or what it was even intended for. I just think it's interesting because it looks like a really fucked up frogget. Next, jumping to FNAF 4, I want to talk about how either Nightmare or Nightmarian could be the representations of death, but in the original video I only mentioned Nightmare as being death. Personally, I think it could go either way, but here's my interpretation of things. Nightmare represents death from the crying child's point of view, being an even more dangerous and messed up version of the thing that killed him. Meanwhile, Nightmarian is just a general personification of death, think the Grim Reaper for instance. Also, I just kinda like Nightmarian representing death in some way, because having the bringer of death be a twisted version of the animatronic that gave life to the dead kids is pretty cool. Next up for FNAF World, I missed these two weird unexplained images that I think were on the FNAF World website at some point, but I'm not sure. There's this one with the ball boy enemy, which is disconcerting enough, but then there's Mangle, who decided the game was so bad they just end it all. Apparently some people see this as Mangle holding onto their paddle ball from the trailer with their mouth, but then that leads to the questions of why and how is their paddle ball up there, and also why is any of this happening at all. Honestly, I kinda like the hanging theory instead, just because it would be cool for FNAF World of all games to have something so unexplained and kind of unsettling. Oh yeah, I also figured I should mention FNAF World originally got released on Steam until later on, where Scott realized he was charging $5 for a slap on the face and said, yeah, that probably wasn't the best idea. So he took the game off Steam and in a nice move gave everyone who bought the game refunds. It would later be moved to Game Jolt, where it would receive a second update that overhauled the overworld and added the Halloween stuff. You actually can play the update 2 through Steam though. Just boot it up and send this mess of a line through the search bar in your browser, go through the link, and the thing will download for you, which is how I played it. This is a lesser known about and lesser used feature of Steam that some developers can choose to enable, and something I may or may not talk about in a future video, so if you want to have the convenience of FNAF World on Steam, there you go. Alright, so that makes 4 and World out of the way, and now on to Sister Location. What do we have here? Oh. Right. I don't know how I forgot about this one, but it's time to talk about Sister Location's adult theory, gamers. Now, if you're a FNAF veteran, you probably just winced a little hearing me say that, and if you're not in the know, you're probably wondering why all the FNAF fans in the audience look a lot more uncomfortable than they did a second ago. But don't worry, I'm here to educate you. So, apparently this theory goes that the little sister location here is a bit more of an adult area than your usual Fazbears, with the animatronics doing stuff. Yeah, stuff. Now, the theory doesn't say people would be hardcore going at these things, but the way it does present itself is basically animatronic strip club, which, yeah, sure, I guess. The theory basically says this whole deal would be a way to talk about, get this, sex crimes, because yes, these animatronics are still possessed by dead kids, which, wow, there's a lot to unpack with that one. Guy who wrote this says not to dismiss it just because of the preconceived notion that FNAF wouldn't go there, but even if I roll with that, I'm not sure if FNAF could even properly tackle that subject. Also, even though we know this is super incorrect now, I noticed that 1, we already had designs for these robots and they still look like they're made to turn people into paste, and 2, some of the ways they prove the location wasn't meant for children are the exposed wires, machinery, and floor-level vents, which, aside from the fact that it seems like no customer should be around that, mainly the exposed wires part, also, the FNAF 2 location checks the boxes of exposed wires and floor vents, and that's for literal infants, so yeah. What I find interesting is this theory was actually made by the developer of the aforementioned Pop Goes, so yeah, that was a hotly contested theory for a while there, not sure how I missed that one. Alright, I think that's enough redoing games. Pretty sure this is more than the last video already, so with that, let's start closing up the classic era of FNAF. Alright, there's a lot to go through, including having to dig up a bunch of old Steam posts Scott made, which wasn't painful at all. I did get to find out Scott likes playing Mega Man 3 Mega Buster only, which makes him incredibly base though. Anyway, for a bit there we weren't even sure if there was gonna be a 6th mainline FNAF game, and man, could you imagine if they closed things off at Sister Location, especially with its cliffhanger ending? I wouldn't have been bothered at all. He said he was scrapping the sequel game he was working on and said he wanted to work on some side projects for FNAF, notably a Pizzeria Tycoon game. Oh boy, I wonder what happened with that. There's actually a lot of things that were talked about here, how Scott wanted to make a VR game in the future, continuing the books. He even mentions wanting to catch up on some FNAF fan games, specifically Candies, Pop Goes, Flumpties, and Joy of Creation. And judging by nowadays, I'd say he enjoyed himself. Later on, we get some teaser images, mainly this image of Freddy from that FNAF 2 minigame running around to feed the kids. That's not all though, because the FNAF World website actually enters the picture again with this nice set of peepers, and there's a full argument happening in the source code of both FNAF World and Scott Games, with someone trying to take control and the other person excommunicating them from the book club. On top of that, I'm not going to mention the books yet, but in the FNAF Freddy Files guide, the end of the book has this picture that looks like a really weird version of Baby, which got people speculating. As I mentioned earlier, at the time I was busy doing other stuff, I guess. I don't know what I was doing in 2017, man, but considering it came out in December, I'd say I was still playing a lot of Overwatch and feeling really burned by Sonic Forces. The war is never over. In fact, I only realized there was a new FNAF game out when I started seeing videos about it popping up in my YouTube recommended. Yeah, the game just sorta dropped out of nowhere. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Yeah, very funny. I had the pleasure of going in blind for this one, but even looking at those simplistic images on the Steam page, I didn't buy that for a second. But sure, I can play along. We got small Fred boy here serving some pizza to the kids. I mean, sure, my shadow clones are trying to put a stop to that, but it's fine. I'll shove pizza down their throats too. Here we go. This is more what I expected. Alright, bring it on then. I love this intro. The sudden shift to this dark room with the droning ambience, the only thing separating you from this murder machine is a small table, giving you as much time as needed to take it all in until you realize the tape player, listen to it for a minute, culminating in Baby speaking back unprompted.
Begin audio prompt in 3,
2, 1.
But anyway, enough of that. Congrats, bro, you've somehow managed to come under the resources to own a Freddy Fazbear's location. Considering how bad the upkeep in these places are, I'd say all you need is $2 and stale pizza dough to own one. We've been on the receiving end of these places for too long. It's time we craft some human rights violations ourselves. So, what's our budget looking like?
Let's see how much cash you had left over after purchasing your franchise package. Great, that should be more than enough.
So, take this with a grain of salt, because this was found in one Google search, but, average electricity bill for a restaurant is somewhere near $30,000, so this place needs to burn down before the end of the month. Man, I really gotta fix that cough. This here shows the first part of FNAF 6's gameplay. Your pizzeria. Over time you'll be able to expand and add stuff to the place, but as for right now, what you see is what you get. Once you're done with your pizza creation, you get to clock out and, hey, this looks like the hell I'm familiar with. At the end of each day, you get to do your standard FNAF office gameplay, and just like FNAF 3, there's nobody to come kill you on night 1. But unlike FNAF 3, I think it's super warranted, because this isn't as self-explanatory if you ask me. Once you've finished all your tasks here, don't worry, we'll get back to it, you move over to the salvage section of the night, and here you'll take these murder machines that were supposedly just found chilling in the back alley, and you get to choose whether to get rid of them or inviting a liability. So yeah, standard FNAF gameplay loop, just this time we got like 3 whole things going on. Honestly, not a bad way of mixing FNAF's repeated sit-and-survive gameplay with Sister Location's 5-a-night micro-game structure. So let's break this down, starting with the first phase of gameplay, that being your career in restauranteering. Right now, this place looks like a log cabin we're lucky enough to own, but after some time you can expand the building and add all manner of fun stuff, including games and animatronics. Just like Barnyard. Right now, considering our wealthy status of $100, we can't afford much and our animatronics boil down to whatever was in the dumpster with some googly eyes slapped on. So please welcome #1 Crate and Pan Stan to the fray. As you spend more money, you'll unlock more catalogs to progressively buy more expensive and high-class stuff. How do you get more money, though? Well, there's 3 ways, but I'll wait on that third one until it's relevant. The first way is advertisements. You have the option to take in adverts from a variety of establishments nobody else wants to associate with for a pretty sizable amount of money. The second big way is, Well, the normal way. Once you start up each new pizzeria phase, you'll bring in some money from customers. However, these customers are also perfectly in their right to take your money away. See, the items you buy may or may not have some liability to them. Shout out to the vacuum cleaner, somehow having a point on the might harm you scale. Additionally, sometimes items will go on sale, but in exchange, not only do they have a ton of liability points, but they also carry the risk of your purchase coming with something undesirable. I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue what point this even serves, because it's not like there's a big enough need to continually bring new items into your restaurant. You don't even need to bring in good business, because, as we'll find out later, business is the last thing on the establishment's mind when this place was opened. It feels like there was supposed to be some motivating factor to make me bite the bullet and buy the markdown stuff, but as it stands, it only exists to your detriment and is easily avoidable. Alongside the liability on individual objects, there's also a number that tallies together the liability of every object you currently have set up, and the higher the number is, the more likely you'll be sued. Here you'll have the option to either fight the case or settle it to some music that I have listened to for an hour straight on multiple occasions. This leads into a fun new segment called The Type of Shit They Try to Sue You For in FNAF 6. My kid got his head bitten by an animatronic. First off, that would never happen at Freddy Fazbear. Secondly, my only animatronic is a fucking box. My kid fell down and the staff didn't care, so now he's afraid to go outside and be ignored again. You ignored him when he fell down. Your fault, not mine. The kid broke 100 bones, and we're just gonna assume it was you. It makes sense you blame us for that, but you can't prove it. My kid got parasites from your food. Man, you should have seen the last guy. Here's my favorite one. My daughter saw an animatronic head roll on the ground, which put her in a coma for 10 weeks. This place has been open for 2 days. How was the coma 10 weeks? And the cherry on top of it all, staff asked the head to not ask any more questions. That's just beautiful. Yeah, that's another thing. This game does mixing of jokes a lot better than Sister Location did, not just because I think the jokes in this game are funnier, but also because of the framing. In Sister Location, they felt randomly put in and felt out of place in what's otherwise a pretty standard FNAF game. 6, on the other hand, has the advantage due to the pizzeria and office split, so it's able to have a lot of its joke stuff in the pizzeria, where everything is generally more comedic and light, while the office stuff that's separated from it keeps things serious and closer to what you'd expect. You even have this funny little guy around during the pizzeria sections named Helpy, who for some reason looks like Funtime Freddy. Honestly, in some ways, it feels like it's trying to take the piss out of itself, obviously with the lawsuits, but also with some of the stuff you can buy, which, yeah, sure, let's go through that. There's all sorts of general stuff you can buy for the place, you know, decorations, better plates and cups, animatronic stages, sound equipment, a jar of pickles on a stool, a classic one, but then there's all the fun games and stuff. There's all these arcade machines that will be super important later, but there's also all this other stuff laying around. You got these ball pits where you realign Helpy's spine. You can also do some basketball, assuming you don't suck like I do. These clowns where you have to get all the FNAF World Balloon Boys in one shot. This one's weird. And my favorite minigames, gambling. I spent an embarrassing number of tries fishing in this giant ball pit, because I know if I'm lucky I can fish up Music Man, who's a super expensive animatronic, but man, I just have the worst luck here. Oh boy, the ball pit tower only costs $750 and Music Man is a whopping $19,000. Alright, I got my 10 play tokens, this should be a good amount, let's run it. Okay, so I wasted all my tokens, and all I got for it was a couple bucks. Never gamble. Then there's also the animatronics. I like how they went through not only the effort of making all the new versions of Freddy and the gang, but also all these other random characters. Of course there's our favorite characters who we took out of the garage, but then there's also all these guys. Happy Frog, Mr. Hippo, Pig Patch, and Ned Bear. They strike a nice balance between being fine to look at, but also being a little shitty since they only cost a few $100. Then there's the Rockstar variants of the original 4, which are probably the most throwaway versions to date, which is kinda sad because I have a little bit of a soft spot for them. This is one of the few versions of Foxy that isn't in complete shambles. He even has a bird, and I like the stars they have on their stomachs. It's a small and random detail, but I don't know, it's neat. Plus, these ones actually strike a nice balance between the look of the original animatronics and their toy versions without looking stupid. For some reason, despite also being throwaway characters, Orville and El Chip cost more than what I can assume is the Mickey Mouse of this universe, and there's even a Funtime Chica who shouldn't exist and looks disgusting. But the crowning jewel of all of them has gotta be Lefty, who goes for a whopping $5 and really likes murder. That covers it for our pizzeria, so now let's move on to the office sections, and man, there's a lot to unpack here. So an interesting twist, you don't have to survive until 6 AM or some other arbitrary time limit. Instead, the night ends once you've completed all the tasks on your computer. One thing I like about this office is how claustrophobic it feels. You have your computer right in front of you and 2 vents on both your sides that are almost directly in front of your face when you turn to look at them. Now, you actually have a lot of resources to take care of any assailants, which I'm kinda mixed on. So first off, you're able to, at any time, turn off the computer or the fan. Turning off the fan is very important, since with it off, you'll be able to hear audio cues more clearly, and it also doesn't make as much noise for the animatronics to hear. The downside of this is your temperature meter slowly goes up and kills you at 120 if you keep the fan off too long. And then there's also the computer, which I'm not sure what the point of turning the computer off is. It doesn't make less noise, and there's pretty much no reason to do it, so why can't I do it? Now, one of your tabs you'll notice is silent ventilation, but this is a scam and I never use it. See, silent ventilation only makes things silent on the animatronics end. You'll still be able to hear all the noise the vents make, and since one of the big pros of having the fan off is being able to hear things better, why not just do that? Plus, there's also this mechanic where of your 3 main processes, you can only be using one at a time, and seeing as motion detection and especially audio are way more important, I'm not sure why you would ever use silent vents. Next, there's motion detection. You hit the button and hope it decides to show you what you're looking for. At first I was a little confused because I would turn it on and wouldn't see anything, but then I realized it's all in the name, motion detection. Oh, okay, so it's probably only detecting when they move from one area to another. It's a little inconvenient, but I guess if it were better, it'd be a little overpowered. Basically, you're able to see where an animatronic moved to, which means if nobody's moving, you won't be seeing anything. Honestly, though, I usually only ever use it once during the whole night right at the beginning, so I'm able to see where everyone is and see where it would be best to put my audio lure, and then I never touch it again. Speaking of which, the audio lure is easily the best of the 3 and pretty much the only one you'll be using through the whole night. It's exactly what it says on the tin, and even comes with the added perk of sometimes letting you see animatronics that are affected by the lure, which as you go on basically obsoletes the motion detector. For the last thing you can do regarding both vents on your sides, if you hear something going on, you can turn to the side you heard the noise on and wait until you hear them go away. I am super bad at hearing the sounds in this game. I feel like they blend in a lot more with the ambient sounds and screeching of your computer than the sounds in FNAF 4 did, to where I actually had an easier time getting the audio cues in that game. That's pretty much everything here. Strangely enough, despite going back to the Office gameplay, this one doesn't have cameras. Not sure how valid this is, but I bet with the audio lure idea, Scott figured adding cameras would make things a bit too similar to FNAF 3, although I think mixing in the mechanics present here and the fact that you have multiple threats to deal with as opposed to one could have made something more distinct from that game. I was also surprised with pretty much everything here, you just have to figure stuff out, which I guess I was just used to 4 and Sister Location telling you what the deal was directly. I was pretty worried going into this one, because on top of being one of my lesser played games, I also didn't remember as much of the game loop in 6, but those worries instantly evaporated as soon as I got into things. I mean, the first few nights were about what I expected, just 1 or 2 guys playing audio lure near where they spawn and they'll be dumb enough to not move. But then I realized that that's pretty much all of it. The only added step was looking at the vent opposite to where I put the lure, and I blazed past the nights in this game. Just jump in, put the lure on the right, look at the left vent, occasionally go back to the computer and put my task to go. The funniest part is that I was actually having a bit of trouble near the end of the game, and you want to know the revolutionary technique I used to get past this part? I put the audio lure on the left and turned to the right instead. Please hold your applause. The interesting part is, unlike some of the other games, I can't even get a gauge on what the animatronics are doing to see what's going on, since all I've got to work with are a few squares. After this, we move into our final gameplay segment, the salvage sections. Hear you pulling a murder machine for a nice interview, let the tape play its sounds. When the tape guy says to mark down the sheet, you do it, and zap the robot with a taser if it starts looking at you funny. But don't tase them too much or you won't get as much money out of it. And an interesting change, you don't even need to bring the animatronics in and are fully able to just throw them back from whence they came, but there's never much of a reason to grab a few and not some, cause for the true ending you need to salvage all of them, and for the other important endings you won't need to salvage any. Speaking of salvaging stuff, let's get into the main animatronics we'll be fending off. Our first two are actually linked, Molten Freddy and Scrap Baby. This links back to the argument we saw in the source code, as Molten Freddy is actually entered, since the argument was showing all the souls inside entered excommunicating Baby after she started being a real asshole. Since Baby was originally the leader, you could say, of Ennard, once she was gotten rid of, that honor got passed down to Funtime Freddy, hence this piece of electronic spaghetti. I'm cool with Molten Freddy, but I kinda prefer Ennard because I thought the clown mask gave him some unique flair, while Molten Freddy just kinda feels like another Freddy. And then there's Scrap Baby. To me, this one's much better than her original design. After being forcefully ejected from Ennard, she had to piece herself back together with whatever garbage was lying around. She has more wire-like hair, a really cool giant claw, some roller skates, cause why not? Her chest even has some of the lights that were present in her sister location room, which is a very nice touch. I think Scrap Baby being intentionally cobbled together helps elevate a design that in any other circumstance would be a giant mess. Don't worry though, cause to fulfill our giant mess quota, here comes in Scrap Trap. Oh my god, what have they done to you? Now first off, the elephant in the room. This is Springtrap, but it looks wrong. The more prominent snout, giant gap in the head, more claw-like fingers, lack of an arm, and actually having animatronic bits on the feet as opposed to the endoskeleton showing, are all features the original Springtrap lacked, so what's the deal with that then? Well, apparently, from what I understand, the running theory is that after the Fazbear Frights debacle, Afton was having a real bad day since his favorite fursuit was in disrepair, so he tried his best to fix the thing up, which resulted in Scrap Trap. I mean, I guess that explains the scrap part of the name, but it's just such weird parts of it that were changed that don't even make it look like the same guy anymore. On top of that, the most upsetting part, you remember the cool corpse inside the Springtrap suit? It looked intimidating, had metal parts intersecting with the flesh that did a good job portraying the spring lock failure that happened. Now let's look at the corpse inside Scrap Trap.
Walnut.
The whole deal here is pretty understandable if you're familiar with some of Scott's older work. The guy can make a cool animatronic design, but he's not a person I'd go to if I was looking for human character models, and I still wouldn't. I was looking through some of the community posts on the FNAF subreddit to figure out how we got here, cause going into this video I genuinely didn't know, and I stumbled across this comment by one of the moderators that I thought was interesting enough to bring up, but keep in mind I'm pretty sure none of these are confirmed, I just thought they were good talking points. Firstly, Scott might have wanted to use a different model for Springtrap to avoid allegations of lazy model reuse that were apparently levied against the Phantoms from 3. I've never heard this complaint, but that's dumb considering it makes sense they be the same models, they are literal hallucinations of those past animatronics. Besides, even then, I still don't feel like it justifies such a radical redesign like this. I mean, come on man, Springtrap is iconic. Secondly, since to get ahead of myself a bit, one of the main goals of this game's story is to tie everything up into a nice bow, so to clear up the debate I skimmed past in the last video on whether Springtrap was William or Michael, he gave Willy Boy a more defined skeleton since Michael had that scooped out of him by the end of Sister Location. This one makes sense, but like with a lot of things in this series, I feel like that could have been better communicated in-game. Anyway, with all that unpacked, our last animatronic here is Lefty, actually. Why is he more important than the other animatronics you buy for the restaurant? Well, other than the fact he's probably carrying a knife on him, we'll be saving that and my thoughts for Lefty in general for later. Now, the way I imagine this was supposed to play out is that each of the 3 segments of gameplay will play into each other, but not only is this fundamentally flawed, all the ways the segments play into each other are to the detriment of the office section specifically. So for some context getting into this, there are 3 main endings I dig for my run through this game, Duga being the only plot important ones. Those being Lorekeeper, Insanity, and Completion. Lorekeeper and Insanity involve you needing to buy certain things for your pizzeria, and Completion is basically you doing the standard FNAF gig. See, the advertisements I mentioned earlier that you could take for some money will then cause you in the office sections to deal with the adverts showing up on your computer. They will completely stop your task as well as stopping any additional stuff you were doing like your audio lure, and you'll need to wait 5 seconds to skip it, which doesn't sound like much, but in FNAF 5 seconds could be the difference between life and death. Now you might be thinking, wow, that sounds detrimental to the office section, so I might not want to take those. But no, because I need the money. This might lead you to saying, oh okay, so instead I'll get my money from salvaging, which feels like it would be the right solution, but no, that's also wrong. Salvaging animatronics for whatever reason gives you much less money than getting the adverts does, which means for these endings where you need a lot of money, the best option is to accept all the advertisements and not salvage anybody. Yes, you'll have to deal with the interruptions, but it's not like it'll mean anything since nobody's in the building anyway. So what about the completionist ending? Well, it's a little bit better, but not by much. See, now there's an inverse problem. Since I need to salvage all the animatronics and do the standard FNAF thing, there's basically no incentive to interact with the pizzeria, at least not entirely. See, there are 3 upgrades you can purchase during the office sections. They make all your tasks go by faster and will run you roughly a combined total of $2,000. That being said, it's not hard to get $2,000 in this game, so what you can do is just put a few items up in your pizzeria within the first day or 2, play some mini-games. I chose to grind out the Midnight Motorist arcade game for this run, and more than likely by the end of day 2 you'll have all the money you need, at which point the pizzeria will be entirely useless. You see all this stuff I bought during my completionist run? Yeah, there was no point in buying like 90% of this, I just did it because I like the tycoon shit. This just makes all the separate parts of gameplay feel so disjointed. I feel like more effort should have been placed into making everything work together. As it stands, I feel like the system only works to benefit the first playthrough, and that's it. See, in your first run, you'll more than likely be ready to build up your pizzeria, take an ad because that's a whole lot of money, then be caught off guard when you get to the office sections, learn that greed is a deadly sin for a reason, and then be forced to realize that you'll have to contend with that and an animatronic once you get to the salvage sections. As soon as you realize how this stuff works, however, the game collapses in on itself, due to you never needing to interact with the gameplay segment that harms the one you're currently working on. That being said, I'm gonna be honest, I was still enjoying myself. Look, let me keep it real, I talk big game with all my analysis and big words or whatever, but at the end of the day, I'm just some guy, which means occasionally I like to indulge in the simple things, and FNAF 6 is the simplest of things. It's definitely a more laid-back FNAF experience, and I was kind of enjoying making my funny little pizza restaurant and being able to have a relatively stress-free time with the nighttime sections, which I probably appreciated more considering the last 2 mainline games was 4, where I was constantly putting 100% of my focus into a hearing exam at all times, and Sister Location that gave me a hernia at every turn. I still stand by everything that I said, but I also don't want to make it seem like I didn't enjoy my time through this one either, because I did have a pretty nice experience with this one. But let's back it up a bit, because now it sounds like I'm wrapping up this game, but no siree, because I specifically saved the story discussion for right now. It is definitely the biggest focus in this game, and leads swiftly into the game's multiple endings. 3 of which are the important ones I already mentioned, but I'll also quickly go through the other ones and why I'm not bothering with them. First up is the mediocrity ending, where you get to the end of the game with 0 Faz rating, which means not placing anything in your pizzeria and not salvaging any animatronics. I shouldn't have to explain why I don't want to do it because it is super boring. Next is bankruptcy, just end the money counting segment in the negatives, which is most easily done through spending too much on lawsuits. It's only an ending in the same way getting a game over in any other game is. Finally, there's blacklisting, which is a fair bit more interesting. You have to end the week with a total liability rating of 50, and since this requires buying a lot of marked down stuff and items in general, that means you'll actually use the ads presing and will have difficulty ramp up quicker, since the animatronics will be coming in more quickly from the marked down items that you'll be buying. This will also take away your salvage chances, which means no salvage money, and instead you'll just have this sign instead. A lot of people usually see this if you buy Lefty before you salvage him, but it's interesting to see that it can happen with the other animatronics too. Additionally, with each liability point, there's an increased chance that an animatronic can get in even if you don't buy marked down items, which I only found out recently. Even with 1 point, there's a super small chance someone can just show up, which I remember happening to me on one really old playthrough where Lefty showed up on like night 1 or 2, which really confused me. Honestly, this kind of feels like what FNAF 6's gameplay was meant to be. To be able to get the ending, you want to keep on making decisions in the pizzeria portion that negatively impact the office sections, and can potentially leave you with nothing to do on the salvage end. On top of that, as the days go on, you'll only be making the office parts more difficult. However, with some smart purchasing and clever thinking, you could potentially increase the chances to play the salvage minigame and get some money that way and lighten up on the amount of ads you need, which will end up making the office sections easier. It's exactly what I wanted. Everything influences everything in some way, and it also functions as a sort of hard mode to make up for the lack of a traditional Night 6 in this game. I didn't do it for this run just because I didn't think it was necessary, but it's definitely interesting and something I might check out in the future. Anyway, of the important endings, I'll start with Lore Keeper. For this one, you buy and play the Midnight Motorist and Fruity Maze minigames, as well as the security puppet that cost a whopping 12,000, so good luck with that. Starting with the Midnight Motorist, which is a pretty simple racing game, but on the final lap you can find a hole in the bottom. Here you get to drive around in a familiar purple car that may or may not have had bloodstains washed off it recently. Hey, remember when I got mad Michael was purple in Sister Location? Well, when you step out of the car, you're orange. It's still aft, and they just decided to make him orange, cause why not? Who cares about the colors of the characters anymore? You can walk over to this place called Junior's that people still don't have a clear read on what it is, and theories range from it being the FNAF 2 location to just some random bar. This green fellow really does not want you in the place, and honestly I'm kind of throwing my hands up here because I have no idea what the significance or explanation for Junior's is. At first glance, it feels like this would be the FNAF 2 location, and this is happening during the days where the phone guy tells us that nobody is allowed in or out of the building, but correct me if I'm wrong, was the FNAF 2 location opened when this takes place? Because it's important to note that this event is more than likely following Afton's murder of the kid in that FNAF 2 minigame, as noted by the purple car being the same one from the minigame, and the files even name it as later that night. So, is this a different Freddy's location that's in the FNAF 2 minigame? Are they both open concurrently? I'm not sure because timeline stuff in the series is weird. Either way, if it's not open at this point, then that leads the correct assumption to be the random bar theory, but why? What's the point of that? Also, if you go off the main path, you can find this empty area with a mound of dirt that seems to be pointless and weird, but it actually has to do with the book, so we'll save that for book discussion time later on. You end up getting yourself home, and it seems like one of the kids, Michael most likely, since I'm pretty sure this is after that kid got his head bitten off, he locked himself in his room and went through a window to that place again, and that's where the minigame closes. I'm not sure if that place again is supposed to be a Freddy's location or if he's being taken somewhere else. Again, this minigame just kind of confuses me. Next up is Fruity Maze, which is more simple. You just gotta beat it 3 times and see the fruits become dog corpses. You know, normal arcade things. I love the small detail in this where when you get a time extension, the screen flashes and you can briefly see the kid playing the game in the reflection, but as the game changes, eventually you see Spring Bonnie behind the kid in the reflection as well. On the last one, you hear a car, and then after convincing the kid to go to the back room, so make that +1 on the dead kid counter. This one's also also easier to break down as well. Basically, Afton slam dunked this kid's dog into the pavement with his motor vehicle, and I guess he just feels like being cruel today and uses that as leverage to kill off another kid. Also, because of the way Remnant works, don't worry, we'll get there. I remember a theory making the rounds that Mangle was possessed by the dead dog, which would be its own can of worms, but I'm not sure how true it is and if it's even relevant at all, so let's just ignore that. Finally, there's the security puppet, where you sit here waiting for a kid with a green wristband to show up, and they never do. That is, except for the final time, where your green kid is outside, but all it takes to defeat the security measures of this place is to put a box on the box. Eventually, you're able to make your way outside, and the kid's dead, the puppet breaks down from the rain, and the minigame closes off. This could be seen as the new and shiny remastered version of the Take Cake minigame from FNAF 2, where this girl possesses the puppet. On top of that, I don't know how I forgot to mention this, but this is Afton's first kid he killed, as the puppet lets the other kids possess the robots. Probably should have mentioned that when I was talking about FNAF 2. Now this leads to the insanity ending. If you buy this giant egg thing, you'll notice it says Data Archive on it. I'm not sure why the giant egg is a Data Archive, but if you put the thing in your pizzeria, go to the office, turn the computer off, and then hold the button on the bottom left of the monitor while powering it back on, you'll get some interesting blueprints and a monologue by the guy on the salvage tapes. The tape guy says a lot of important stuff about a monster he unwillingly helped create, how all these souls have been trapped in the machines he made in ways he never intended, how he lured them into a familiar place, and how the tape guy is gonna undo what he's done. It's pretty clear that the tape guy is talking about Afton, but then who is the tape guy? Well, I'm gonna dip my toes into the books a bit here, but this man is Henry, the business partner of Afton who helped make Fazbears, is pretty much innocent in the whole thing and has a daughter that can't get enough of being killed and put inside puppet robots. This does present a bit of a conundrum though, because Henry actually has made an appearance in the FNAF games before this, because, get this, he was the desk guy in FNAF World. And, somewhat important tidbit, that guy's dead. Now, there are two options for this. One, it got retconned, which I ironically believe had less to do with Henry's role in the story and more to do with the fact that it was something that happened in FNAF World. Or two, this is an interpretation of his death in the books where he killed himself by allowing one of his animatronics to murder him, which sounds real rough, so it's a shame I can't take that fact seriously, because the animatronic in question is a Big Knife Endo. This also presents the problem of, in World, he died to Baby, not the Endo, so his death in that game being scrapped seems like the most likely explanation. We also see some important stuff in those blueprints on the computer. Firstly, the scooper from Sister Location that apparently is used to contain and inject Remnant into stuff. Remnant is used as the stuff that allows people to possess animatronics, which is something Afton was experimenting with. What is Remnant, though? Well, I can't exactly say, because in the books and these blueprints, it seems to be a physical object, as noted by the substance should be malleable, but then FNAF AR had to come in swinging and make it an interpretation of a soul. I don't think what Remnant is matters as much as what it can do, but that still gives me another reason to say fuck FNAF AR. Honestly, I don't even know why Remnant needed to be a thing. I feel like ghost possessing objects is a pretty standard thing in fiction. All this serves to do is complicate a process that didn't really need complicating. Next, we have the blueprints for this RASC thing. I completely forgot about this, and it took me a while to get it, but of all the things, this explains how the audio lure works. It's a little roaming robot that outputs sound that has to stay connected to the central server that controls it, meaning the central server is your monitor. It also most likely means the C stands for child, and you lure them around the same way you lure Springtrap in FNAF 3. A bit of a weird thing to explain, but that's kinda why I like it. It's just a goofy little explanation on a game mechanic. Finally, though, there's the blueprints for Lefty. Lure, encapsulate, fuse, transport, and extract. That's not how you spell it. It has a bracelet with a specific code on it and can emit a lullaby for soothing, and it's possible to tell what its deal is with that already, but let's get even more specific. There are these images you can rarely see on Boot Up, kind of like the images of Springtrap in FNAF 3. I swear this game is like a soft sequel to that one specifically. While we're on them, I love these images. They make the animatronics seem super intimidating. I love a lot of FNAF renders because they have this grime that reminds me of old 3D renders, which isn't something I've seen a lot of other games harness, but it kind of adds to this creepiness factor that I haven't seen utilized much and is something I'd like to see other games do because I think it has a lot of potential. If you look at Lefty's picture, specifically the arm, you'll see some familiar stripes belonging to none other than the puppet. This whole aspect of Lefty really ties the whole character together, and I'm not sure how popular of an opinion this is, but they're up there as one of my favorite animatronics from the whole series. It was made by Henry for the sole purpose of containing the puppet, which is such a unique concept on its own, but it also helps along some of the other parts of the design that would be weird otherwise. The fact it's for the most part a recolored Rockstar Freddy and has one eye missing makes sense considering his physical appearance wasn't something that was important, since he wasn't even meant to perform on stage like the other animatronics. It's such a different idea and something that still hasn't been done again, which just makes Lefty feel even more special. This swiftly moves over to the completionist ending, where you have to salvage all the animatronics. You really get it drilled in your head too, aside from the fact that for doing normal FNAF stuff, getting rid of the animatronics just feels wrong, but at the end of each day you hear a repeated clip of the narrator saying you want them all to be in one place, that initially you end up thinking is making your pizzeria super cool, but then you realize, oh, those guys are probably supposed to be in here. It's kind of climactic in a way. I mean, you got a Freddy, a consistent thread across all the games, and a prominent character in 1 and 4, Scraptrap, the instigator of the whole thing, and main antagonist of 3, Lefty, not just representing the animatronics in the pizzeria portion of the game, but also containing the puppet who started the possessed animatronics stuff, and was a major threat in 2, and Scrap Baby, the only acting kid possessing a robot, and the antagonist of, wait, that's not right, documentary narrator of Sister Location. There's a good reason for this too, because we're about to cap everything off right here, right now, with an iconic speech. I'm not even gonna recap it, I'll just roll the clip in its full glory.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name. But I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume, although you have indeed been called. You have all been called here, into a labyrinth of sounds and smells, misdirection, and misfortune. A labyrinth with no exit, a maze with no prize. You don't even realize that you are trapped. Your lust for blood has driven you in endless circles, chasing the cries of children in some unseen chamber, always seeming so near, yet somehow out of reach. But you will never find them. None of you will. This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. I am remaining as well. I am nearby. This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of every tragedy should. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, friend. My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours. And then, what became of you? I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter. I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication.
I've been very critical of the story for the past few games. I've said that it would have been more narratively cohesive if the story just closed off at 3. But despite all of that, this one moment makes it all worth it. It's so powerful and satisfying. I think one of the main reasons has to do with a really good voice performance by Mr. Dave Steele, who does a great job as Henry throughout the game and gave another really good speech during the Insanity ending. Still stands as my favorite voice performance of any FNAF character. Some of the lines are just really good on their own too, like, "The darkest pit of hell is open to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, old friend." Oh my god! Just give him the double middle finger while you're at it. It's also important to mention the small bit of a route out of the building being planned for you, but you stay in the fire instead, saying, "I have a feeling that's not what you want and that you're right where you want to be." This adds fuel to the fire of a theory that had been brewing between Sister Location and this game, that being that Michael is the character you play as in the original trilogy, going to all the locations where the spirits haunt the animatronics to undo the work of his dear old dad who he tried to set on fire that one time. This also has the slight side effect of explaining why you keep getting fired for odor, you're a dead corpse, that's kind of funny, and also kind of explains the phantoms from FNAF 3. It was always kind of weird how you were having hallucinations and you were just some random guy, but here you're having hallucinations of the locations you've gone to before this, which makes a lot more sense. The only exception to this is FNAF 4, where you still play as the crying child, and I hope that stays that way because it'd be kinda lame otherwise. That's another reason this ending is so satisfying, because when I think about it, there isn't anything else I feel still needs to be resolved. All the major plot points in one big fire were taken care of. This actually has a lot to do with the main goal of this game, which goes into development stuff, kinda talking about everything backwards for this game. Going back to that interview again, it was a really good video, please watch it. Scott said FNAF 6 was made out of necessity because of all the story beats that still needed to be resolved. On top of that, he intentionally made the game not draw much attention to itself, and made the game free because it was specifically created for the fans that wanted to see everything concluded. On top of that, the release structure of this game just showing up was spawned from a random comment Scott read that basically said that he shouldn't start teasing a game and start the drip feed over a year again, which influenced his release strategy for this game. I think this was a really good play on his part actually, just because the same pattern of release a game, wait a few months, tease the next one, wait between a few months to a year, and repeat, was starting to wear thin. Despite being a deviation from the usual gameplay, Sister Location felt like the height of fatigue with the franchise, which is why the only major people who were still keeping up with the games were those who were invested in the franchise. Things were just becoming repetitious, and I honestly feel like even I was feeling that way at the time, albeit not to the same extent since I got into it later. I was able to experience the games that were released, got excited for Sister Location, played that one, and at that point, I got my fill and moved on. Which is also why in the period between Sister Location and 6, I just wasn't paying attention to it. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expect us to keep caring just because it's FNAF, which is even a sentiment Scott shared in the interview. The repetition was even getting to Scott a little. To go back to that Steam post where he said he wanted to make something different, I feel had to do with the fact that despite the shakeups in gameplay, at their core, I feel like all the FNAF games are pretty similar to each other, and that'll wear down anybody after a bit. I think secretly working on the game in preparation for a shadow drop was the best option, considering the surprise of it got a lot of people interested. That brings us to the end of FNAF 6, and man, what a weird one. It's got a lot working for and against it, and in general, it's in a really weird position in the franchise. In some ways, the polarizing gameplay almost makes sense given the focus on story, and its main goal being to finish things that needed finishing. Despite all of it though, yeah, I'd probably say this is one of the good ones. It's definitely not gonna be for everyone, and other than the ending, I'd say this is one of the lesser talked about FNAF games, so just have an open mind and give it a try. You won't have anything to lose, it's free after all. Now, initially, this wasn't gonna be the end of 6, since it was set to get a custom night expansion like Sister Location did. After some time, though, the expansion kept getting bigger, too big to just being added on to a pre-existing game, which resulted in the final game of this era of FNAF. Let's close things off with Ultimate Custom Night. Now this is an interesting one. I actually stuck around for the pre-release of this, and it's one of my most played FNAF games. The teasers are pretty cut and dry, but stand as some of the most memorable, continually showing more characters that we have to face off against. Shout out to Endo01 and Candy Cadet being on the roster at some point before getting replaced. I'm not sure if they were actually intended at some point, or if Scott was just being funny, but sucks to be them. Soon enough we get the full roster, and I think this is a very solid selection with a good quantity of notable characters and some jokes as well. It's amusing how, despite including the entire gang of mediocre melodies, this still basically has no filler as opposed to the sister location custom night. Apparently, though, that wasn't all, as there'd be some other random guys showing as well, adding 7 other characters, mainly comprised of secondary or Easter egg characters, but most interestingly, or confusingly, depending on your outlook, Dee Dee from FNAF World, because Mendo is still not invited to the party. There was one last character that would be shown, though, the big man himself, and a character people have been wanting to see for a while, Fredbear, and despite being one of the more simple teasers, it's probably one of my favorites just for how foreboding it is. After that, the game came out not too long after, also for free, and I've clocked quite a few hours into it. What's also fun is that, for the most part, the story is pretty simple. Afton died, and now he's in hell being tortured by the spirits of the animatronics. Sweet and to the point, the most concise plot summary I've ever had to do for one of these games. So you're met with this screen when you start up the game. Each animatronic mostly has its own mechanics that you gotta learn that when dealing with a lot at once can make things really stressful. Prior to the release of this game, Scott released some fake character info based on some fan theories that turned out wrong. Foxy would run into your office to help you out, referencing the Foxy is a good guy theory. Phone Guy would call your office to make noise, which is how he normally works, but he also notes that he won't call if Springtrap is in the vents because he can't be in 2 places at the same time, referencing the Phone Guy is the purple guy theory. And finally, Nightmare Freddy would appear in your office holding an alarm clock you could activate to wake up, and it would let you skip 10 seconds of the night, referencing the dream theory. Man, does that one sting. Honestly, despite being one of the more low-key April Fool's jokes, it's one of my favorites. I just thought it was funny. From FNAF 1, we got the core 4, and surprisingly Phone Guy himself. FNAF 2 gives us the toy and withered versions of Bonnie and Chica, as well as Golden Freddy, the Puppet, Mangle, BB, and JJ. FNAF 3 has Phantom Freddy, Mangle, and Balloon Boy, as well as Springtrap. FNAF 4 has the Nightmare variants of Freddy, Bonnie, Fredbear, Mangle, and Balloon Boy, on top of Nightmarian, Nightmare, and Jacko Chica. As the single FNAF World rep on the base roster, we have Old Man Consequences. Sister Location has Baby, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, and Ennard, and finally 6 has the most characters, with Trash and the Gang, Mediocre Melodies, the Rock Stars, all the animatronics from the Office sections, as well as Music Man, El Chip, and Funtime Chica. On top of that, there's our hidden characters, with the aforementioned Dee Dee, Shadow Bonnie, Plush Trap, Nightmare Chica, Bonnet, surprisingly not Bonbon, which is even more weird considering Funtime Freddy isn't here, and there's the Mini-Ringas and Lulbit. Quite a stacked room, so before we go to the animatronics themselves, let's cover the office. The default office has a lot of nice references to all the other offices from the previous games, even if it's a bit of a clusterfuck, but I like how you can unlock some added offices, with one making reference to Sister Location in 6, one for 3, and the room from 4. There's actually a lot of added keybinds for doing actions, which is something in Sister Location 2, but they were mostly optional, but here they're required since the doors don't have buttons. I kinda like it though. I have more control over everything. Being able to use a WASD for closing doors and flipping the camera up just feels a lot more quick and works more in high stress situations. There's also a vent on the floor that has like 3 characters that can come through it that you can close with F. You have a power meter back again, but it's a real problem and you gotta make every percent count because it drains super fast. There's also a noise meter that some characters get agitated if there's too much noise, and there's a temperature gauge from 6 coming back. You automatically have the fan on your desk on to keep the temperature down, but you probably won't want to have it on since, depending on the situation, the heat won't matter much and keeping the fan on will heavily affect the power. The temperature gauge actually doesn't kill you if it gets too high, it caps out at 120, but some animatronics also don't like the heat, so you gotta keep tabs on that. Similar to 6, you also have multiple actions that you can choose to run, but here they all are useful and do a larger variety of things. Ironically, except for silent ventilation again. Not sure what that does for you here or why you want to use it in comparison to everything else. The power generator is basically required to be turned on as much as possible because it effectively doubles the amount of power you have going, but it does make a good bit of noise, so if there's someone who's sensitive to that stuff, you gotta turn it off occasionally. The heater increases the temperature, which sounds like a bad thing, but there are a few animatronics that are weak to the heater. For example, most of the animatronics in the ducts can be pushed back using it, and you can make Rockstar Freddy malfunction so you don't have to give him your coins. The AC makes the room cool down extremely quickly, which is good for characters like Jacko Chica if I need it to stop being hot quicker than the fan can do. But interestingly enough, Nightmare Chica is the only animatronic that specifically has gotten rid of using the AC. Finally, there's the global music box, which is a bit more situational as it can wind up the puppet's music box for you and can calm down Lefty and Chica specifically. Then there's the cameras, and there's a good bit going on here. We have our normal cameras, and they're a bit weird for me, because I feel like they aren't as cohesive, but then when I think about it, it's nothing that out of the ordinary, really. Maybe it's the 2 Pirates Coves they have for some reason that's throwing me off, I don't know. Though it feels like the cameras aren't as good as they could have been. Like, the hall cameras are good, the prize counter is important for a good few animatronics, but then there's situational cameras. Like, the closet only matters for Lefty, parts and service that's only for Toy Freddy, or the right-hand Pirate's Cove that only matters for Funtime Foxy, or in the small chance that Plush Trap shows up. The camera's becoming more useless as things get more difficult is a consistent problem across all the games that use them. I think the game that got closest to having a balance down was 3, but even that created the inverse problem of the office becoming useless. I just think with so many threats to deal with, some of the cameras were underutilized. Then there's the vents, where you can actually see all the animatronics traveling through them as opposed to the vent cameras from 3. And considering how many animatronics can be in these at once, it was probably a good choice. You can put a vent snare on to block one of the vent entrances, but I don't usually do this since all the animatronics are blocked by the door anyway. Would have been interesting to see how one that was only blocked by the snare would have worked though, but I don't know if that would have been too annoying or not. Finally, there's the ducts. They use a system similar to 6 where you place an audio lure down and just kinda hope the animatronics follow along with it. You can also block one exit at a time, and that's pretty much it. You're mainly hoping the animatronics are dumb enough to hover around the lure for the entire night, and thankfully most of the time they are. Again, just like 6. Now, with 50 animatronics to deal with, there's a lot you have to keep track of, so let's break this down. First, there's the 9 distraction animatronics. They can't kill you directly, but they can make it easier for the other guys to do it. Then there's 4 guys you can take care of using the Freddy mask, same as FNAF 2, just sit there with it on for a bit. All 5 mediocre melodies are in the ducts and function the same, just getting harder as you go, with Happy Frog being immune to the heater for some reason. Then there's 4 guys that require you to stay on top of either heat or noise. Technically, Freddy doesn't kill you if it's too hot, but he does get a lot faster the hotter it is. Then there's 3 animatronics where you have to buy their plushies at the prize counter to make them go away. And finally, there's 5 animatronics that go through the vents in pretty much the same manner. Some of them have their own specifications, like you can see Springtrap in the vent and Molten Freddy can go through the snare, but for all of them you can still just close the door. Already we've shaved down a clean 30 animatronics to 6 systems, but we can clear out even more on top of that. Bonnie and Foxy work in tandem, where you just look at the figure on the desk to see who's at Pirate's Cove, look at the place for Foxy, don't for Bonnie. Balloon Boy and JJ both come from the side vent and disrupt you. BB takes away the flashlight and JJ takes away door control. Nightmare, Fredbear, and Nightmare work the same, just Nightmare comes from the right and Fredbear from the left. That gives an additional 6 animatronics who can be simplified to 3 things that are done by 2 each. But finally, there's Scrap Baby and Scrap Trap, who only try to kill you once per night. Shock for Baby, close the side vent for Afton. And now that we've simplified all those guys, that leaves only 12 animatronics that work completely differently and have their own mechanics that you need to keep track of, which is much more manageable and easier to get down. I'm happy that despite having some repeats, they do a lot of cool and unique mechanics as well, especially compared to the last custom night that felt really uninspired and bland, especially in comparison to this game. Sorry, I don't mean to keep harping on Sister Location's custom night, but man, it was a real disappointment. Of the 12, there are some returning mechanics from the Puppet, Nightmare Freddy, and Ballora: wind the box, flash the Freddles, listen for the music, and close the door, but the other animatronics have new stuff that nobody's done before, which is pretty cool. Also, even though it's a new one, it's still pretty simple, but for Nightmare BB, you flash him when he's standing, and flashing him while he's laying down is death. Just sort of makes it so you have to keep your light on the left side of the room most of the time. Toy Freddy is a really fun one that makes you play a mini FNAF in the middle of your night. Make sure he doesn't lose the game or he'll take his gamer rage out on you. Doesn't help that the AI in his fake FNAF game is as much of a bastard as the real thing, and at higher difficulties, if you're not keeping up, Freddy can game over in a few seconds. Funtime Foxy's mechanic works with the new timer added to the clock for this game, and now you can see the times for when it'll roll over to the next hour, which in of itself is nice to have. I mean, yeah, there was some suspense in being at 5 AM and inches from dying, while hoping it rolls over to 6 before you're killed, but this makes a new type of suspense where you can see it's gonna be 6 in a few seconds, and you make sure nothing goes wrong in that time. Funtime has a sign outside their curtain, and you make sure you're looking at the camera when the clock rolls over, and half of me believes the new timer was put in place specifically for them, because without it this would be super garbage. Chica and Nightmarion are probably my least favorites out of the whole roster because of how annoying they are to deal with. Chica sits in the kitchen that's in audio-only mode like FNAF 1, and you have to listen for her pots and pans to make sure she's good, and if she stops making noise, change the music. The problem is how specific you need to be about your timing and changing the music, because it feels like if you're only a few seconds too late you're dead, which is really frustrating. There is an unintended way of dealing with her that's way easier, and that's turning the global music box on at every 15-second interval on the clock, which was a bit hard to keep track of but made things way more enjoyable to deal with. Nightmarion, meanwhile, is always around, and if you hover your mouse over them for too long, you die. The main problem has to do with if there's any distraction mechanics, because even though you can't see Nightmarion, you can still hover over them too long and die, which was mainly a problem for me when I had to deal with L-Chip's full-screen advertisements. On top of that, sometimes they go into a pose that covers a lot of the screen at random, and it's way more annoying to deal with than it probably should have been, which could have been solved if the time you needed to hover over them to die was increased. The Rockstars have some of my favorite mechanics. For the most simple one of Chica, she's scared of slipping on the floor, so you put the wet floor sign in front of the door she's at, which is pretty funny. Rockstar Foxy actually repurposes the fake Foxy mechanics, where occasionally you'll see his parrot fly across and clicking it summons him. If he's in a good mood, he'll help you out, but sometimes he'll decide to kill you, which basically means don't click on him if he's at a high difficulty. The only ones I usually do are an extra 1% of power, which is like giving an extra breadcrumb to someone who hasn't eaten in weeks, and 60 degrees so that way I can keep the temperature down without needing to burn power. I haven't talked about tokens yet, but you shouldn't really need it, and I only use soundproof if Music Man is active. Rockstar Bonnie is a cool one and has the potential to ruin your run if he shows up. Sometimes when you flick down the camera, it'll show up in your office and you need to search the cameras to find his guitar. Not only does it give the cameras a bit more purpose, but can also shake things up a lot, since you need to find his guitar while balancing fending off everyone else. Finally, there's Freddy, who just makes you pay him 5 coins occasionally. What are the coins? Well, while looking at the cameras, you can hover over these coin icons to collect them. Apart from the plushies and the Freddy tax to deal with, you're also able to buy this death coin from the prize counter. It only works on some animatronics, but when you use it, you get rid of them from your run and still get to keep the points from them being active, which is really cool. I usually use it on either the Puppet, Toy Freddy, or Lefty, since those are the most consistently active and consistently a problem for me. But if Rockstar Bonnie's on, I usually go with him just because I don't need to be searching for a guitar while doing all this shit. You have the usual custom night challenges to work through, and I think these are some of the best and most evenly spread in the series, as despite the large character amount, everyone shows up in a challenge at least once, and because of how many characters there are, that lends to a lot of customizability to create your own challenges. This is best exemplified with the point challenges for unlocking different offices. Since you don't have to have any specific animatronics active, you just need to have an amount equal to the point requirement, you can turn on whoever you feel comfortable dealing with. By 8,000 points, you have a lot less wiggle room for turning guys off, which led to a lot of these fun moments of doing failed runs, where I got to go back and figure out who I wanted to keep and who I was going to switch in for a guy that was giving me hell. Getting this done was super difficult, and I honestly was kind of proud I got through it. I know I looked borderline psychotic with how hard I was focusing on winning, but man, it was satisfying. While doing this, I also got to learn a technique called camera stalling. This is actually a thing in FNAF 1 and 2 as well, I just never knew about it. Basically, for FNAF 1, if Freddy got to your hull corner, you could keep the camera on him and never leave it to have him be stuck there permanently. And you can keep Foxy at bay doing this as well, because I learned you don't have to look at Pirate's Cove, just flipping the cameras up is good enough for him. FNAF 2 has something similar to this mechanic, albeit not the same, where flashing the animatronics with your flashlight on the cameras would reset the counter that ticked down until they were able to move. Here, camera stalling is most effective in your right hull camera. You're able to stall all 3 plush animatronics and Rockstar Chica, which means not only do I not need to worry about buying the plushies, but I can also keep the wet floor sign for Chica on my left side and never have to worry about her. You're also able to camera stall Toy Freddy and Lefty, but since you'll only be stalling 1 animatronic as opposed to the 4 in the hallway, it isn't as effective. I also learned that while looking in your office, a lot of animatronics that come from your top vent or the doors can't kill you until the monitor is flicked down. So in a pinch, I can close all the doors at once, flip up the camera, reset my ventilation, and come back to open things up again. This works particularly good on the vents since nobody comes through until you've gone to the cameras. This means you can keep a bunch of animatronics sat right at the opening, and close it off to take care of multiple at once. What's fun is that despite me doing all that, things were still pretty difficult. I had to be ready to put on the Freddy mask at all times, had to make sure my temperature was good so that Jacko Chica wouldn't kill me, not mess up at this stupid fish or else no more cameras, make sure Nightmare Freddy and Nightmare Balloon Boy weren't gonna off me before I flipped the cameras up, and on top of that, switching to the duck cameras interrupted my camera stalling on the right hull, which means instant death, so I had to set my audio lure for everyone up there at the beginning of the night and just hope they decided to not kill me. It was pretty damn stressful, but man, it was a good challenge. Other than the base guys, though, we haven't even talked about Dee Dee, a really cool addition that can make or break a run. She can randomly show up and will add a random character that isn't turned on, and I love how it's done with the same character approaching message from FNAF World. It turns it from something I was banging my head against a wall to get in World, to something that gives me an aneurysm every time I hear it. It's fun that it doesn't tell you who was added, just that somebody new showed up, so you end up scrambling around in a panic trying to figure out who was added, and how you can fit dealing with them into your routine. But honestly, most times I die during the panic phase and end up seeing who the new guy was afterward. Sometimes a shadow DD appears that adds one of the 6 secret characters, and some of these can just screw you over completely. The mini-arenas, Lolbig and Nightmare Chica are mostly just minor annoyances, Plush Trap and Bonnet can be super inconvenient depending on your current predicament, and Shadow Bonnie means you can't see the rest of your office, so if you have Nightmare BB or Springtrap turned on, good luck. Also, I want to talk about something really nitpicky, that being the jump scares. Some of them are pretty nice, notably Springtrap and Negbear, Rockstar Foxy, babying all the nightmares except for Mangle and Nightmarian, but then a lot of others feel super low quality. I'm not sure what it is about Molten Freddy and Lefty's jump scares, but they feel animated super weirdly. But what I'm mainly talking about are the ones that are just images shaking really fast, and there's a lot of them. Withered Bonnie, Ennard, Nightmare Mangle, Nightmarian, Bonnet, Music Man, all of them are just fast-shaking PNGs. Shout out to Music Man in particular, because everyone has the jump scare sounds from their respective games, but he has the FNAF 1 sound for some reason, and that just pisses me off. The most egregious, though, has to be Golden Freddy, where it literally is just an image that goes over your screen and you're dead. I know that it doesn't matter that much and most people don't like the jump scares anyway, but they used to be animated so much better, but starting with 6, they feel so slapped on out of obligation, and spoiler, it doesn't get any better after this, minus a few okay ones in Security Breach. Speaking of stuff that pisses me off, remember Fredbear? Well, he's an Easter egg character, kinda makes that teaser more flaccid in retrospect, but you can access him by turning everyone off, setting Golden Freddy to a 1, and then using the death coin. Who's Here's Reggie for me complaining about stuff that nobody cares about. I'm sorry, you build up Fredbear this much, and then it amounts to a FNAF 1 Freddy recolor as a throwaway secret? That's so lame. It also doesn't even make much sense, not just because Spring Bonnie had its own look to it, but why would Fredbear look like the repurposed version of a busted up animatronic that came after that original location? It's so lazy. He doesn't even say anything when you die, it's just garbled noise you gotta decode or whatever. Oh yeah, that's another thing. They added voices for most of the characters in this game, and I think most of them are pretty good. Of course, we have Mr. Hippo's over 2-minute long rants, which is super dumb, but I kinda love it. But I like how they go through the extra effort to differentiate the voices of different versions of the same character. One of my favorites for this is Foxy and his Rockstar variant. They both do the same shtick of the pirate voice, but they still sound distinct, which is pretty cool. Though I kinda have the inverse for Nightmare and Nightmarian, where I feel like they could have sounded more different, but whatever, they still sound cool. Speaking of which, I just think some characters have cool voices, notably Withered Bonnie and Funtime Foxy.
Time to face the consequences of your behavior.
It's time to take your final bow!
My favorite probably has to go to Nightmare Fredbear for having two of my favorite lines out of everyone that are cool FNAF 4 callbacks and are just hard on their own.
Let me put you back together, then take you apart all over again. We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them.
Oh yeah, there's also a bunch of lines where people mention the one you should not have killed.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
From what I remember, a lot of people took this to reference Golden Freddy, but I always thought it would be referring to the puppet, considering they made all the animatronics have life, so in the most literal sense, not killing them would have had this all not happen. Oh, and on that note, because we can't have anything nice, Withered Chica got this fun little line. Man, what the fuck? I'm gonna be honest, I have nothing to even say about this one. I just like pretending this never happened, because how do you explain this? So with one last inconvenience to the plot, that wraps up Ultimate Custom Night. It's nothing super complex, I just think it's a fun time. This also closes out what I think is the classic era of FNAF. From here on, the franchise would only get bigger and only get more divisive, if I'm honest. This was my first time replaying these games back to back, and the first time I actually tried to look at them critically, which I think is something more people should start doing. I feel like a lot of critical discussion from outside the fanbase usually goes, FNAF is that horror game for dumb kids, and pretty much ends there, which is a bit sad because I think there's a good deal more than that to pick apart here. As it stands, I think this era was relatively solid, actually. I mean, sure, there were a lot of bumps in the road, and I wasn't cool with everything, but it's impressive how despite all those bumps, there was only one game I definitively could say I disliked. With that, I hope you enjoyed the video, take care, and I will see you all later. Always gamble, baby.